Meet Evelyn Parker, a 68-year-old woman whose quiet life in Ashton, Illinois, was shattered when the very family she trusted most turned against her. After returning home from surgery, Evelyn found her world turned upside down, her belongings thrown into boxes, her home taken over, and her only son standing silently as the door closed in her face. Yet this is not only a story of betrayal. It is also a story of resilience, of a woman who refused to remain silent and who discovered her true strength when everything else was stripped away. This is the heart of Grandma's Final Chapter, a channel dedicated to telling powerful, emotional stories about older adults, stories that shine a light on hidden struggles while celebrating dignity, wisdom, and the courage to live fully. Our goal is to create a community where seniors around the world, from the US to Canada to Europe, can feel seen, valued, and inspired. If you believe in the power of storytelling to heal and to connect, we invite you to join us. Subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you are watching from, and let these stories remind you and those you love that aging is not about fading away, but about living proudly, independently, and with joy in every final chapter. The hospital corridors smelled faintly of antiseptic and overcooked soup, a mixture Evelyn Parker had grown to hate over the past 12 days. At 68, she had endured her hip replacement surgery with a quiet bravery that surprised even herself. The doctors said she was healing well, but recovery felt like a mountain climb with no summit in sight. Each step across the sterile floor reminded her that her body was no longer the same. Still, today was supposed to be a good day. Today she was going home. Evelyn sat on the edge of her narrow hospital bed, her thin fingers folding the discharge papers. She had signed them herself, her handwriting a little shaky but steady enough. She had imagined her son Daniel's face when he would walk through the door to collect her, his familiar half-smile, the way he used to grin as a boy when he ran into her arms after school. She had even pictured Rebecca, his wife, offering a polite word or two as they guided her carefully into their car. But no one came. The nurse looked at her with gentle eyes and asked softly, "Do you need someone to call?" Evelyn smiled faintly, hiding the sharp ache in her chest. "No, I will be fine." She packed her small bag, tucked her worn cloth purse under her arm, and ordered a taxi. As the cab pulled up, she lowered herself into the back seat with slow, deliberate movements. Pain lanced through her hip, but she clenched her jaw and breathed through it. Outside the window, Ashton, Illinois stretched before her in all its quiet familiarity. The streets were lined with maples already tinged with early autumn gold. Children biked past, their laughter floating in the crisp air, and Evelyn's eyes softened. This was her town. This was where she and her late husband John had built their life together brick by brick, memory by memory. Her mind drifted back to the little red brick house with the white picket fence on Magnolia Lane. She could almost see John trimming the roses by the front porch, his face reddened from the sun, and hear his laughter when she scolded him for forgetting his hat. She could almost feel the weight of Daniel's small hand in hers as they walked to the park on summer evenings. That house was not just a building, it was the living heart of her past, a sanctuary that held every joy and every sorrow of her life. The driver asked for the address. Evelyn's voice caught for a moment, but then she spoke firmly. "Magnolia Lane, number 7, the red brick house with the white fence." The driver nodded and turned the wheel. Evelyn pressed her forehead lightly to the cool window, letting the blur of familiar storefronts and sidewalks wash over her. A part of her wanted to believe that Daniel had simply been too busy with work, that Rebecca was occupied with their daughter Emma. Perhaps they were at home now, waiting with open arms, eager to see her after so many days apart. She clung to that hope with every beat of her fragile heart. The taxi slowed as they turned onto Magnolia Lane. Evelyn's pulse quickened. There it was, her house, standing just as it always had. The roses leaned gently toward the gate as if bowing to welcome her home. Her chest tightened with longing, yet something was wrong. The driveway, where Daniel used to leave Emma's little pink bicycle, now held a sleek black SUV that Evelyn did not recognize. The front gate was ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. For years she had insisted on keeping it latched, a small habit John used to tease her about. Her breath caught. A whisper of unease coiled in her stomach, but she pushed it away. They must have visitors, she told herself. Nothing more. The driver helped her out of the cab. Evelyn handed him the fare with trembling hands, clutching her purse tightly. Each step toward the gate was heavy, her hip aching, her mind rehearsing the moment she would finally see her son again. She imagined him wrapping his arms around her gently, murmuring, "Welcome home, Mom." She imagined the warmth of family after days of loneliness in the hospital. But as she reached the door, she realized the house was strangely quiet. No sound of Emma's laughter, no voice calling out from the kitchen. Evelyn knocked softly, her heart thudding. She waited, a thin smile forming on her lips in anticipation. The door opened, but the warmth she longed for did not come. Instead, she was met with a face she loved yet hardly recognized. Daniel stood there, tall, his expression cold, his eyes empty. For a heartbeat, Evelyn thought she had misread him, that his mouth would curve into a smile. But no such smile came. The air thickened. Evelyn whispered, almost pleading, "I'm home, Daniel." He did not move. In that instant, something inside Evelyn began to crumble. Though she fought to keep her spine straight, her eyes steady, she refused to let the pain show. She refused to beg for love that should have been freely given. Still, the silence cut her deeper than any knife. And so part one closes not with a reunion, but with a void so profound it could swallow the strongest heart. Evelyn had survived surgery. She had survived nights of pain in a sterile hospital bed. But nothing had prepared her for this silence, this absence of the people she needed most. If you have ever felt the loneliness of waiting for family who never came, please share in the comments. I want to know if there are hearts out there that understand mine. The silence between Evelyn and her son stretched into something unbearable. She searched Daniel's face for even a flicker of tenderness, some trace of the boy who once clung to her apron strings. But his eyes were like glass, distant and unmoved. Her heart thudded with disbelief. She steadied her voice and tried again. "Daniel, I am home. Let me in." His shoulders stiffened, but he did not step aside. Instead, his frame filled the doorway like a wall. For a moment, she thought he might be joking, that at any second he would break into a nervous laugh, say he was only teasing, and pull her into an embrace. But his lips tightened, and the coldness in his expression grew sharper. Behind him, the house smelled faintly of roasted chicken and lemon polish, familiar scents that once promised warmth. Now they carried the weight of exclusion, as if the life inside belonged to someone else. Evelyn tried to peer past him, but Daniel shifted, blocking her view. Then came the sound of footsteps. A woman's voice floated forward, crisp and cool. "Daniel, what is taking so long?" Rebecca appeared, holding their daughter Emma on her hip. She looked Evelyn up and down as if assessing a stranger at the door. Emma squirmed in her mother's arms, reaching toward her grandmother with a faint cry, but Rebecca pulled her back firmly. Rebecca's tone sliced through the evening air. "From today, my parents are living here. You need to accept that. Please do not make them uncomfortable." The words landed like blows. Evelyn blinked, certain she had misheard. Her voice cracked. "Your parents? In my house?" Rebecca lifted her chin, her eyes cold and unwavering. "Yes, they have more need of this space than you do. Everything is arranged already." Evelyn's gaze drifted past Rebecca's shoulder. In the dim light near the garage, she saw them. Cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly, scrawled with thick black marker. On each one, the letters stood clear. E.P. Her initials, her belongings, pushed aside like refuse, her knees weakened. That box contained her wedding china, a porcelain bowl her mother had given her when she first married John. Another held photo albums with pages worn soft from years of turning. All of it, shoved into the dark as though it were trash. She turned back to her son, searching desperately for an ally. "Daniel, say something. This is our home. Your father built this house with his own hands, every brick, every nail." Her voice trembled, breaking under the weight of her plea. Daniel lowered his gaze. His lips moved, but no sound came. Then, with emotion that carved itself into her memory, he shifted his weight, turned his back, and walked away. The wooden door between them began to close, slowly at first, then faster, until it slammed shut with a finality that shook Evelyn's very core. The sound echoed down the porch steps and seemed to settle in her bones. She reached out instinctively, pressing her palm against the door as though she could hold it open by sheer will. The wood felt cool under her skin. Her breath caught, and for a moment she stood frozen, her body unwilling to accept what her mind now knew. Her son had abandoned her. A muffled laugh drifted from inside, followed by the clink of glasses. Life continued behind that door, but Evelyn was no longer part of it. She was a ghost lingering on her own doorstep. The evening light dimmed, painting long shadows across the boxes stacked by the garage. A breeze stirred, carrying the faint scent of roses from the garden John had once tended. Evelyn's throat tightened. She wanted to scream, to pound the door until her hands bled, to demand her rightful place in the home she had sacrificed everything for. But instead, she stood in silence. Her heart ached with memories. She remembered Daniel as a boy sitting on the porch steps, swinging his legs, asking endless questions about the world. She remembered his laughter when John lifted him high above his shoulders. Where had that boy gone? Who was this man who could turn his back so easily? The weight of betrayal pressed down, heavier than her healing hip. It was not only her son's rejection, it was the loss of her anchor, her family, her very identity. Evelyn finally lowered her hand from the door. She looked once more at the initials scrawled across the cardboard boxes. They stared back at her like a cruel reminder. She no longer belonged here. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall where anyone might see. She straightened her shoulders, though every muscle trembled. With slow, measured steps, she turned away from the house. The gravel path crunched beneath her shoes, each sound like the closing of another memory. As she reached the street, the last light of day slipped below the horizon. The house behind her glowed faintly in the darkness, but the warmth within was no longer hers. Evelyn whispered into the wind, her voice breaking. "How could you, Daniel?" There was no answer, only the quiet rustle of leaves, as if the world itself turned its face away. Evelyn's legs felt weak as she walked down the sidewalk, away from the house that had once been her sanctuary. The porch light glowed behind her like a beacon, yet it no longer belonged to her. Each step she took was heavier than the last, as if the weight of 68 years pressed down on her shoulders all at once. In her hands she carried only a single cardboard box, the one she had pulled from the pile near the garage. It was marked with the black letters of her name. The rest of her life remained stacked like rubbish in the yard of strangers. She reached the corner and paused, her breath uneven. Cars passed, headlights cutting through the early night, indifferent to the woman standing with her box of memories. Evelyn raised her hand and hailed a taxi. A yellow cab slowed to a stop, its brakes squealing. The driver, a man in his 40s with tired eyes, looked at her with mild curiosity. "Where to, ma'am?" Her voice wavered. "Anywhere. Just a hotel in town." The driver nodded without pressing for more. He stepped out quickly, opening the back door and helping her lift the box inside. The simple kindness nearly undid her. For a moment, Evelyn's lips trembled with the urge to speak, to confess to this stranger that she had just been cast out of her own home. But she bit her tongue and slid into the seat, holding the box tightly against her chest. The cab ride was short, but each street they passed tugged at her heart. She saw the bakery where she used to buy Daniel his favorite apple turnovers, the church where John's funeral had been held, the park where she pushed her granddaughter Emma on the swings only months ago. Every landmark whispered of a life that no longer seemed to belong to her. The cab pulled up in front of a budget motel on Main Street. Its neon sign flickered in dull red letters, Ashton Royal. The building's paint peeled at the edges, and the windows glowed faintly yellow. It was far from the home she had left behind, yet it was all she could afford at that moment. The driver carried her box to the front desk. The receptionist, a young man with kind eyes and a nervous smile, straightened when he saw her struggle with her steps. "Do you need help, ma'am?" Evelyn forced a nod of gratitude. "Thank you. Just a room for the night." He slid a key across the counter, his voice soft. "Third floor, room 12. The elevator is down the hall." "I'll carry the box for you." The small gesture of decency filled the hollow space her son's cruelty had left. Evelyn blinked back tears as she followed him slowly. She whispered, almost to herself, "There is more kindness in strangers than in my own family." The room was plain, with beige walls and a faint scent of bleach. The curtains sagged, and the lamp on the nightstand flickered when she turned it on. The young man set her box down gently by the bed. "If you need anything, just call the desk." Evelyn nodded, too choked with emotion to respond. When the door closed behind him, silence wrapped around her like a heavy cloak. She sank onto the bed, the springs creaking beneath her weight. For a long time she sat still, her hands resting on the box. Finally, with trembling fingers, she lifted the lid. Inside was a jumble of her life. A wool sweater John had worn on chilly autumn evenings, a porcelain bowl chipped along the rim, a wedding gift from her mother, framed photographs wrapped in yellowed tissue paper. Evelyn's throat tightened as she lifted one of the frames. It was her wedding photo. The glass was cracked across the corner, a jagged line that cut through John's smile. Evelyn traced the fracture with her fingertip, her eyes filling with tears. She remembered the way his suit had been slightly too big, how his hands had trembled as he held hers at the altar. They had been so young, so certain that love could carry them through anything. Now the photograph lay broken in her lap, just like her life. Evelyn clutched it to her chest and bowed her head. The pain from her hip throbbed, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her heart. She whispered into the empty room, "John, what would you say if you saw this? What would you do if you saw our son turn me away?" Only silence answered. For the first time in days, Evelyn let her tears fall freely. They ran down her face, soaking into the faded quilt on the motel bed. She cried not only for herself, but for the years she had given, the sacrifices she had made, the son she had raised, and the love that seemed to have vanished from her family. Outside, traffic hummed faintly, and somewhere down the hall a television droned. Yet inside that small room, Evelyn felt as if the world had stopped. She was no longer a mother welcomed home, no longer a wife cherished by her husband. She was a woman cast adrift, clutching a broken photograph as if it were the last thread tying her to the life she once knew. She lay back on the bed, the frame pressed against her heart. Her eyelids grew heavy with exhaustion and grief. The neon light from the motel sign seeped through the thin curtains, painting the walls with a dull red glow. Evelyn closed her eyes, her last thought before sleep descending like a whisper. She had survived the hospital, but surviving this new emptiness might prove harder still. The morning light filtered weakly through the thin curtains of the motel room, painting faint lines across the quilt. Evelyn awoke stiff and sore, her body aching from both the surgery and the weight of yesterday's heartbreak. For a moment she did not remember where she was. Then her gaze fell on the open cardboard box beside the bed, the broken wedding photo still resting on top. Reality struck her like a hammer. She was no longer at home. She was a guest in a cheap motel with only fragments of her life beside her. Her first thought was to call Margaret. Margaret Lewis had been her neighbor for over 30 years and her closest friend. After John passed away, it was Margaret who had brought soup every evening and reminded Evelyn that she was not alone. More importantly, Margaret was a lawyer, sharp and relentless, with a reputation in Ashton for protecting the vulnerable. Evelyn had once teased her that she had the soul of a fighter wrapped in the patience of a saint. Today, Evelyn needed that fighter more than ever. When Margaret arrived at the motel, she carried with her a leather briefcase and an expression of concern. She wrapped Evelyn in a gentle hug, then pulled back to study her friend's face. "You look like you have lived 10 years in a day," she said quietly. I feel as if I have, Evelyn admitted. Margaret, they threw me out. They put my things in boxes as if I were nothing. And Daniel, my own son, he turned away. Her voice cracked, but she held herself together, refusing to collapse again. Margaret guided her to the small table in the corner of the room. Tell me everything from the beginning, she said firmly. Evelyn recounted the story, every detail from the cold doorway to the broken photograph. By the end, Margaret's lips had tightened into a hard line. They must have forced you to sign something, Margaret said. No one can just throw you out unless there are papers. Did you sign anything at the hospital? Evelyn frowned, thinking back to those hazy days when she could barely sit up. Rebecca handed me some forms. She said they were insurance documents for the surgery. I did not read them. I trusted her. Margaret reached for her briefcase and pulled out her laptop. Let us find out exactly what they have done. She asked for Evelyn's online banking details, and with trembling hands, Evelyn gave them. Margaret typed quickly, her fingers flying across the keys. Then she turned the screen so Evelyn could see. The account that had once held her life savings was nearly empty. Over $150,000 had been withdrawn in the past month. The transfers all bore the same destination: Dawson Properties, LLC. Evelyn's eyes widened. Dawson? That is Rebecca's maiden name. Her parents are Robert and Linda Dawson. Margaret nodded grimly. Yes, this company is under their names. They are not just living in your house, Evelyn. They are funneling your money into their property business. Evelyn felt her chest tighten. The betrayal grew heavier with every revelation. They took everything: my home, my savings, my trust. All of it. Margaret clicked through additional records, her expression darkening further. It is bigger than just you. Look here. She pointed at a list of transactions. Dawson Properties has been purchasing homes across your neighborhood. The Herreras, the Beltrines, the Wilsons, all of them sold within the past year. This is not coincidence. This is a pattern. Evelyn leaned closer, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Memories of her neighbors came flooding back. Mrs. Herrera, who had lived on Magnolia Lane for decades, had once confided that she might have to move. Evelyn had assumed it was due to age or health. Now she saw the truth. They had been pushed out, just as she had. Her voice trembled, but carried a spark of anger. It is not only about stealing from me. They want the whole street. The Dawsons are swallowing the neighborhood. Margaret's eyes burned with determination. Exactly. This is not a family dispute anymore. It is fraud on a large scale. If they are planning redevelopment, the value of these homes will multiply. They are using you and your neighbors to get rich. Evelyn sat back, her heart pounding. The walls of the small motel room seemed to close in as the enormity of the betrayal sank in. This was not only about being unwanted in her own home. This was about an organized plan, cold and deliberate, to erase her community and profit from the ruin. Her fingers tightened around the broken photo frame she had carried with her. She thought of John, of how he had poured his sweat into repairing that house, of how they had raised Daniel within its walls. She thought of the laughter of neighbors at barbecues, the children running through sprinklers, the roses that bloomed every spring. All of it was being stripped away by greed. For a long moment, Evelyn sat in silence, her chest rising and falling with the weight of her realization. Then, slowly, a new strength stirred within her. The woman who had been cast aside was no longer willing to remain voiceless. She looked at Margaret with eyes that no longer trembled. I will not let them take everything. Not from me, not from the neighbors. I may be old, Margaret, but I am not finished. If they want a fight, I will give them one. Margaret reached across the table and squeezed her hand. That is the Evelyn I know. We will gather evidence. We will expose them. You are not alone in this. Evelyn nodded, the fear in her heart now mixed with determination. She knew the road ahead would be long, and the Dawsons were powerful in their small city. But she also knew that silence was no longer an option. That night, as she sat by the motel window staring at the glow of Ashton's streetlights, she whispered into the darkness, "John, give me strength. I will not let them destroy what we built." Her reflection in the glass looked older than she remembered, lined with pain. But behind the wrinkles burned a light she thought she had lost. She was not just a woman cast out. She was a fighter about to begin her counterattack. That night, the motel room felt different. The same beige walls and flickering lamp were still there, but Evelyn's heart no longer drowned in despair. The conversation with Margaret had stirred something she thought had died with John. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt the faint spark of defiance, a whisper of the woman she used to be. Margaret returned the next morning with a small box. She placed it gently on the table, her eyes serious. "If we want to bring the Dawsons down, we need more than suspicions. We need their words, their plans, proof they cannot deny. This will help." Evelyn leaned forward, curiosity flickering in her tired eyes. Margaret opened the box. Inside lay a delicate silver bracelet, simple in design, with a small clasp that looked ordinary to anyone but those who knew its secret. "It is fitted with a hidden microphone," Margaret explained. "Lightweight, almost impossible to notice. If you are anywhere near them while they speak of their schemes, it will capture everything. The recordings will go straight to a secure device. But Evelyn, wearing this will put you in danger. If they realize what it is, they will not hesitate to silence you." Evelyn reached out and lifted the bracelet. The metal was cool against her skin, yet it seemed to burn with responsibility. She studied its delicate chain and imagined slipping into her son's house again, the place that had once sheltered her laughter, now tainted by betrayal. A chill ran down her spine. For a moment, doubt tried to creep in. She was 68, her body still weak from surgery. What chance did she have against people so ruthless, so calculating? Her gaze drifted to the cardboard box by the bed. The broken photograph of her wedding lay on top, John's smiling face cracked by a jagged line. She picked it up and traced his image with trembling fingers. Memories washed over her, their first dance under strings of borrowed lights, his strong hands lifting Daniel when he was just a toddler, his voice in the garden as he trimmed the roses, and then, most clearly, the words he had repeated whenever she faltered. "You are stronger than you think, Evelyn. Never let anyone break you." She closed her eyes, clutching the frame. "John," she whispered, "I will not let them erase us. Not our home, not our lives. I promise you." When she opened her eyes again, they were wet with tears, but steady. She slid the bracelet over her wrist and tightened the clasp. The metal glinted in the dull light, not as a piece of jewelry, but as a weapon. Margaret's hand touched hers. "Are you sure?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "I am not afraid anymore. They may see me as old, as weak, as disposable, but they have forgotten one thing. I am still alive, and I am still their mother, their neighbor, the woman who built a life here. I will not leave quietly." Margaret's eyes softened with pride. "Then we will move carefully. I will stay close, monitoring everything. But you must be ready. Once you step back into that house, you are walking into the lion's den." Evelyn gave a faint smile. "Let them roar. I have weathered storms greater than this." Later that evening, she stood before the small mirror in the motel bathroom. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead, casting sharp lines across her face. She studied the woman staring back at her. The reflection was not flattering. Her hair was thinner now, streaked fully with gray. Her cheeks sagged with age. The scar from the hip surgery was hidden beneath her nightgown, but she could feel its dull ache every time she moved. For a long while, she almost did not recognize herself. She saw only the losses: wife without a husband, mother without a son, woman without a home. Then her eyes fell on the bracelet circling her wrist. Its silver gleam caught the light, and for a moment, she saw not an old woman abandoned, but a survivor preparing for battle. Her shoulders straightened, her lips pressed into a line of resolve. This was no longer the face of a victim. This was the face of a woman ready to fight. Evelyn leaned closer to the mirror, whispering as if to engrave the words into her own soul. "You are stronger than you think." The phrase echoed through the small room, blending with the memory of John's voice. She felt him with her, as though his hand rested on her shoulder, steadying her, urging her forward. When she stepped back from the mirror, Evelyn no longer felt like a guest in a cheap motel. She felt like a soldier preparing for war. The world had taken much from her, but it had not taken her spirit. She would gather proof. She would expose the Dawsons. And she would reclaim not only her home, but the dignity they had tried to strip away. That night, as she lay in bed with the bracelet cool against her skin, she allowed herself a small, fierce smile. She was Evelyn Parker, and she was ready. The night was heavy with silence as Evelyn stepped out of the taxi at the far end of Magnolia Lane. The street lamps glowed dimly, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, the silver bracelet hidden beneath her sleeve pressing cool against her skin. Every step toward the house made her heart pound harder, each beat echoing in her ears like a drum of warning. The red brick home stood in the distance, bathed in the yellow light from its living room windows. From where she stood, it looked exactly as it had for decades, the roses still climbing the trellis, the white fence catching the faint glow of the streetlight. Yet it no longer belonged to her. It belonged to the people who had stolen her life piece by piece, who now laughed inside those walls as if she had never existed. Evelyn crept along the alley that bordered her property. Once, this path had been Daniel's secret route, the way he used to slip in after forgetting his house key as a teenager. She remembered scolding him, only to laugh when he hugged her and promised never to forget again. The memory twisted in her chest like a knife. Tonight, the same path was her only way back inside. The back door to the kitchen stood ajar. She paused, steadying her breathing. The faint hum of voices floated out into the cold air. She pressed herself against the wall, listening. "With her name on the documents, the bank will approve the loan without hesitation," Robert Dawson's voice rumbled. It was low, steady, filled with the confidence of someone who believed he would never be caught. Linda's reply was sharper, tinged with mockery. "Evelyn Parker is too old and too weak to fight back. A forged signature here and there, and no one will even bother asking questions. By the time she realizes, we will have the money in our hands and the properties under our control." Evelyn's pulse raced. Her hands trembled as she reached for the bracelet clasp and pressed the small hidden button. A faint click confirmed the recording had begun. Every word they spoke now belonged to her, proof of the betrayal. She edged closer to the crack in the door, careful not to make a sound. Inside, Robert sat at the dining table with a stack of papers spread out before him. Linda lounged in a chair with a glass of wine, her eyes glinting with cold amusement. They looked like vultures circling a carcass, feasting on what had once been Evelyn's life. Robert tapped a pen against the papers. "With this credit line, we can push the development plan forward. Once the city approves the rezoning, the value of these houses will triple. By then, no one will care how we got them." Linda raised her glass in a mocking toast. To Evelyn, the perfect pawn. The words seared Evelyn's heart. She wanted to storm in, to snatch the papers and scream that they could not erase her. But she forced herself to stay hidden, her body pressed tight to the wall, her breath shallow. She knew this was bigger than her anger. This was about survival and justice. Suddenly, her foot shifted against the loose edge of a flower pot by the door. The pot tipped, hitting the ground with a sharp crack that shattered the silence. Evelyn froze, her blood turning to ice. Robert's head snapped toward the sound. His eyes narrowed, sharp and searching. He rose from his chair, the heavy scrape of wood against tile echoing through the kitchen. "Who's out there?" His voice was a growl, thick with menace. Before Evelyn could retreat, Robert stormed through the doorway and into the yard. His large frame filled the narrow space, his face twisted with suspicion. His hand shot forward like a striking snake, clamping around Evelyn's wrist. His grip was crushing, his breath hot with the stench of alcohol. "You dared to come back here," he snarled, tightening his hold until pain shot up her arm. "Did you think you could spy on us, old woman?" Evelyn bit back a cry. Her free hand groped desperately at her sleeve, brushing against the bracelet. She prayed the recording had already captured enough that Margaret or the agents waiting nearby would hear. But fear clawed at her throat. Robert's eyes burned with rage, and she saw no mercy in them. "Robert, stop!" Linda called from the doorway, though her tone lacked real alarm. She sounded more annoyed than concerned, as if Evelyn's presence were nothing more than an inconvenience. Robert's grip tightened. "Do you want to end up in the hospital again, Evelyn? Or perhaps this time you will not come out at all?" The words made her stomach churn with terror. She closed her eyes, whispering silently, "John, give me strength." Then, just as Robert raised his free hand as if to strike, the night split open. The sharp wail of sirens filled the air, red and blue lights flashing against the walls of the house. Tires screeched on the street as vehicles skidded to a halt. "Federal agents, do not move!" The yard erupted in chaos. The back gate burst open and agents poured in, their voices commanding, their weapons drawn. Robert froze, his grip loosening in shock. Evelyn stumbled back, gasping as fresh air filled her lungs. Two agents moved swiftly, pinning Robert's arms behind him and snapping cold metal cuffs onto his wrists. Linda dropped her wineglass, the red liquid spilling across the threshold like blood. Her face paled as she raised her trembling hands, her voice shrill. "You have no right. This is our house." But Evelyn knew better. It was her house, her life, her truth that had been stolen. And now the evidence was in the hands of justice. She cradled her aching wrist against her chest, her breath ragged but steady. For the first time in weeks, she felt the tide begin to turn. "If you were in my place, would you have dared to return to that house to find proof? Share your thoughts in the comments. I truly want to know." The flashing red and blue lights painted Magnolia Lane in colors of chaos. Neighbors had gathered along the sidewalks, their whispers rising and falling like a restless tide. Evelyn stood at the edge of her yard, her wrist still throbbing from Robert's grip, her heart racing with the aftershock of what had just happened. She watched as agents marched Robert Dawson toward a waiting car, his face contorted with fury, while Linda trailed behind, shrieking about injustice. For Evelyn, their cries meant nothing. She had the recording, she had the truth, but her relief was short-lived. From the shadow of the staircase inside the house, another figure emerged. Daniel. He looked smaller than she remembered, though he was still a tall man. His hair was unkempt, his shirt wrinkled, as though sleep had been broken by the sudden arrival of sirens. He descended the steps slowly, each movement reluctant, his eyes darting between the agents and his mother standing in the yard. Evelyn's breath caught. This was her son, the boy she had carried for 9 months, the child who once fell asleep on her lap while John read the newspaper by the fire. Yet the man before her was also the one who had stood in her doorway and said she could not come home. He was both everything she loved and everything that had destroyed her. 2 officers approached him. Their voices were firm. "Daniel Parker, you are under arrest for your involvement in fraudulent property transfers and conspiracy to commit financial abuse." Daniel's face crumpled. He glanced at Evelyn, his lips parting as though he wanted to protest, but no words came. His eyes filled with panic as the officers seized his wrists and pulled them behind his back. The metallic click of the cuffs echoed like a final judgment. "Mom!" The word burst from his throat, raw and desperate. "Mom, please!" The cry pierced Evelyn's heart. It was not the voice of a man, but the cry of a frightened child. She saw him as he had been decades ago, a boy with scraped knees calling for comfort. For an instant, her instinct was to run to him, to shield him from the world as she once had. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. But the memory of the wooden door slamming shut crushed the impulse. She remembered the way he had stood silent while Rebecca ordered her out. She remembered the coldness in his eyes when he turned his back. That wound still bled inside her, deeper than any scar from surgery. Daniel struggled against the officers, his voice hoarse. "Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far. Please, don't let them take me." His words carried through the yard, and the crowd murmured with unease. Neighbors turned to look at Evelyn, as though waiting for her to step forward, to plead for her son. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. The tears slid down her cheeks, silent and hot. She turned her face away, her shoulders stiff. She could not speak, not when her soul was torn between love and betrayal. To forgive too quickly would erase the pain he had caused, the nights of loneliness, the humiliation of being cast aside. Yet to deny him completely would be to deny the bond of blood that no betrayal could fully sever. Daniel's cries grew weaker as the officers led him toward the car. "Mom!" His voice broke, barely more than a whisper now, his head bowed. Evelyn forced herself to stand still, her hands gripping the fabric of her coat until her knuckles ached. She could not bring herself to watch him disappear into the back seat, yet she could not close her ears to the sound of the door slamming shut behind him. The crowd remained quiet, the air heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed. To them, it was a scandal, a spectacle. But to Evelyn, it was the breaking of her heart all over again. She felt as if she had been split in two, the mother who longed to comfort her child and the woman who could not forgive what he had done. When the last patrol car pulled away, silence settled on Magnolia Lane. The house stood before her, lit by the harsh glow of the agents' flashlights, yet it felt colder than ever. Evelyn lifted a trembling hand to her face, wiping away her tears. She whispered into the night, so softly no one else could hear. "Daniel, you were my everything, but I cannot save you from yourself." The words burned her throat as she spoke them, but they were the truth. The neighbors shifted uneasily, some looking at her with pity, others with quiet respect. Evelyn drew in a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had survived betrayal, she had survived humiliation, and now she had survived the sight of her son in handcuffs. Yet she knew the hardest battle was not against the Dawsons, or even the courts. The hardest battle lay inside her, where love and anger collided, where forgiveness and resentment twisted into knots she could not yet untangle. The night grew colder. Evelyn wrapped her coat around her shoulders and turned away from the house. For now, she could not bear to look at it, nor at the ghosts of family that haunted its walls. The morning after Daniel's arrest, Evelyn found herself seated in a cold, gray room at the FBI field office in downtown Springfield. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, their harsh glare amplifying the emptiness in her chest. On the table lay a thick folder that Agent Collins had just dropped before her with a sharp thud. The sound jolted her, like a hammer striking the fragile glass of her heart. "Mrs. Parker," Collins said in a steady voice, "we uncovered these documents in a safe inside the Dawson residence. You need to see them." Her fingers trembled as she reached for the file. She flipped it open and immediately froze. Inside were copies of her medical records, page after page detailing her hip surgery, her recovery notes, even the dosage schedules for her medication. Every detail of her suffering had been preserved, but not with care. It was as if someone had cataloged her pain to turn it into currency. Evelyn's throat tightened. "How did they get this?" she whispered, though a part of her feared the answer. Colin's expression darkened. He pulled out another stack of papers, his voice grim. "We have evidence that Sarah Whitman, a nurse assigned to you during your hospital stay, was receiving payments from Rebecca Dawson. We believe Sarah intentionally altered your medication dosage to cause infections and delay your recovery." The words struck Evelyn like a physical blow. She gasped, clutching the edge of the table as if the room were tilting beneath her. Memories flooded back. Sarah's hurried footsteps, the way she avoided eye contact, the cold sting of needles in the middle of the night. Evelyn had dismissed her unease then, thinking it was paranoia, the byproduct of loneliness in the sterile white ward. Now she realized it had been a trap. Margaret, seated beside her, slammed her palm against the table, her eyes blazing. "This wasn't just theft," she said. "This was an attempt on Evelyn's life." Collins nodded. "We also found a life insurance policy in the Dawsons' possession. The beneficiary was changed 6 months ago to Daniel Parker. The signature on the document appears to be yours, Mrs. Parker, but handwriting experts already suspect forgery. Evelyn's vision blurred. She pressed her hands to her chest as though to keep her heart from breaking apart. Her own son's name, written next to a policy that would only pay out if she died. "I signed nothing," she said hoarsely, shaking her head. "They wanted me gone, not just from the house, but from this world." She could no longer hold back the sob that rose in her throat. The reality slammed into her with merciless clarity. It was not only about property or money, it was about erasing her entirely. They had nearly succeeded. For the first time since John's funeral, Evelyn felt as though she stood on the edge of the grave again. She had faced death once in the operating room, her frail body cut open, her life dependent on the skill of surgeons. Now she realized she had been forced to face it a second time, but this time not by illness or accident, but by the calculated cruelty of those she had trusted. The room grew silent except for her uneven breaths. She felt Margaret's hand close around hers, warm and steady. Evelyn turned her eyes toward her friend. "They wanted me dead," she whispered. "Do you know what that feels like, Margaret? To see your own child's name on a policy that values your life only in dollars? To realize your daughter-in-law paid someone to poison you slowly, day by day, while smiling as she brought flowers to your bedside?" Margaret's eyes shone with tears, but her voice was firm. "Yes, Evelyn, it is unbearable, but you survived. And because you survived, you can make them pay." Evelyn bowed her head, tears falling freely now. Her heart felt carved out, hollow, yet beneath the emptiness, there stirred a small, defiant flame. Twice, she had stared death in the face. Once on a hospital bed, once in the shadows of betrayal. Both times, she had not broken. She was still here. She closed the file slowly, her hands steadier than before. "They wanted me gone," she said in a voice that no longer wavered. "But I will not give them that victory. Not now. Not ever." Colin studied her with a mix of respect and caution. "This case is darker than we thought. The Dawsons are not simply greedy. They are dangerous. What you've endured, Mrs. Parker, is more than financial abuse. It borders on attempted murder. Are you prepared to keep fighting?" Evelyn lifted her gaze, her eyes wet but fierce. "I have faced death twice. I am not afraid to face them a third time if I must. They tried to silence me, but I am still speaking, and I will keep speaking until every last one of them is held accountable." The silence that followed was heavy, yet it was no longer suffocating. For Evelyn, it was the silence of a battlefield before the next strike, the quiet in which courage gathers itself. She had lost her home, her savings, and nearly her life. But in that cold FBI office, she made a promise to herself. If she had already endured the cruelty of death's shadow, then no scheme, no forged document, no false smile could ever frighten her again. The detention center loomed ahead like a fortress, its gray walls lined with barbed wire that glinted in the afternoon sun. Evelyn's steps faltered as she walked through the metal doors, the air inside colder than the October wind outside. The guard led her down a narrow corridor, the sound of heavy boots echoing against concrete. Each step drew her closer to her son, the child she had once rocked to sleep, the man who had cast her out. In a small visitation room, Daniel sat at a wooden table, his wrists cuffed in front of him. His posture was slumped, his head bowed, but when Evelyn entered, he lifted his eyes. They were rimmed with red, hollow with sleeplessness. For a moment, he looked like a lost boy, not the man who had betrayed her. "Mom," he whispered, his voice breaking. Evelyn's heart clenched. The word carried both pain and longing, yet behind it lingered the memory of the night he had stood silent as the Dawsons threw her into the street. She lowered herself into the chair opposite him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Daniel swallowed hard. "I owe you the truth." The silence stretched until it felt unbearable. Finally, he spoke, his words tumbling out like stones. He told her about the real estate venture he had invested in, a plan he believed would secure his family's future. It had collapsed, leaving him in crushing debt. Robert Dawson had discovered his weakness and offered to cover the losses if Daniel agreed to sign over her assets, to stand aside as the Dawsons built their empire. "I thought I was protecting Rebecca and Sophia," he said, his voice cracking. "I told myself it was temporary, that once things stabilized, I would fix it. But every time I tried to back out, they pulled me deeper. Mom, I never meant for you to get hurt like this." Evelyn listened, her chest heavy. Part of her wanted to scream, to ask how he could have chosen greed and fear over the woman who had given him everything. Another part of her, the mother in her, saw the frightened child beneath his words. "I was blind," Daniel continued, his eyes filling with tears. "I let them use me, and when you stood at that door, I should have fought for you. Instead, I turned away. I hate myself for it." The ache in Evelyn's chest grew sharper. She reached into her purse and pulled out an old envelope, its edges yellowed with time. She slid it across the table toward him. Daniel frowned, his cuffed hands trembling as he opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in John Parker's strong, steady handwriting. Evelyn had kept it hidden since his passing, a letter he had left for their son. Daniel read aloud, his voice breaking. "Daniel, my dear son, life will test you. You will stumble. But remember, you always have your mother's love, and you always have my faith in you. Never let fear or greed take the place of honor. You are stronger than your mistakes. When the time comes, choose what is right." The words struck Daniel like a thunderclap. His shoulders shook as sobs broke free, raw and uncontrollable. He clutched the letter as though it were a lifeline. "Dad still believed in me," he choked out. "Even after everything, he thought I could do better." Evelyn's own eyes blurred with tears. For years, she had carried that letter as a reminder of John's quiet wisdom, but now she saw it become a mirror, forcing Daniel to face the man he had become. "I will tell them everything," Daniel said suddenly, lifting his head. His voice, though ragged, held determination. "I will testify against the Dawsons. I will confess every lie, every signature, every dollar they stole. If it means protecting you and redeeming even a piece of what I've done, then I'll do it, even if it means prison." The words hung heavy in the room. Evelyn stared at her son, torn apart inside. To hear his confession was to feel both hope and devastation. Hope that he might finally choose truth. Devastation that he had only found courage when the damage was already beyond repair. She reached across the table, her fingertips brushing his cuffed hands. "Daniel, I cannot undo what you did. You broke something inside me that may never heal. But if you speak the truth, if you help bring justice, then maybe one day I can forgive you." Daniel's tears fell onto the letter, smudging the ink of his father's words. He bowed his head, whispering, "I will make it right, Mom. I promise." Evelyn sat back, her heart torn between love and rage, forgiveness and judgment. She knew the path ahead would not erase the betrayal, but for the first time, she saw a glimmer of the boy she had raised, the boy John had believed in. As the guard entered to end the visit, Evelyn rose. She lingered for a moment, her eyes locked on Daniel's. Neither spoke. In that silence, mother and son stood at the fragile edge between punishment and redemption, between love remembered and love broken. The courtroom was silent except for the steady voice of the judge. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting long beams of light that seemed to slice the air in two. Evelyn sat on a wooden bench near the front, her hands gripping the edge, her heart pounding with every word. "Rebecca Dawson," the judge declared, his tone firm, "for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder, this court sentences you to 18 years in prison." Rebecca's face, once so proud and polished, collapsed into fury. She shouted that she was a mother, that she had only tried to protect her family, but the gavel silenced her. Evelyn watched without blinking. For months, Rebecca's cold smile had haunted her. Now it was gone, replaced by desperation. Robert Dawson, the judge continued, 15 years for directing fraudulent schemes. Robert stood stiff, his jaw set, as if still unwilling to accept defeat. Linda Dawson, the judge said, 12 years for aiding and abetting fraud. Linda's hands trembled as she was led away, her eyes darting toward Evelyn with a mixture of shame and bitterness. Finally, the judge's voice softened slightly. Sarah Whitman, 7 years for professional misconduct and collusion in medical fraud. Evelyn closed her eyes briefly, remembering the sting of injections, the way Sarah had looked away each time. Justice, at last. The final name made Evelyn's chest tighten. Daniel Parker, 3 years in state prison for complicity in financial fraud, reduced due to full cooperation with federal authorities. Evelyn drew in a sharp breath. She turned her eyes to her son. Daniel looked smaller than ever, dressed in prison clothes, his shoulders slumped, but his eyes met hers. There was no defiance in them now, only remorse. She could not smile, could not forgive not yet, but she gave him the smallest of nods. It was enough to tell him that despite the distance, he was still her son. When the judge's gavel fell, Evelyn felt as though a long storm had finally broken. The sentence did not erase the betrayal. It did not return the years of trust stolen from her. But it was justice. And justice was a beginning. Weeks later, Evelyn stood once again inside her red brick home. The walls smelled faintly of fresh paint, the floors newly polished. Margaret was beside her, holding a small box of photographs that had survived the chaos. Together they opened it, lifting out frames wrapped in yellowed newspaper. One by one, Evelyn placed them back on the walls. John's wedding photo, smiling in his too large suit. Daniel at 5 years old, his arms wrapped around her neck, both of them laughing. A family picnic under the maple tree, Sophia just a baby with cake on her cheeks. Each photograph was like a stitch, sewing back the fabric of a life torn apart. Her neighbors began to arrive, carrying homemade pies, cinnamon rolls, and warm embraces. Mrs. Herrera clasped Evelyn's hands, tears in her eyes. "You saved us all, Evelyn. You gave us hope again." Mr. Benton, who lived across the street, nodded with solemn respect. "The Dawsons thought they could buy this neighborhood, but you reminded us that dignity is not for sale." Evelyn felt the warmth of community filling the house. The sound of voices, of laughter, replaced the echo of loneliness that had haunted her. For the first time in many months, the rooms felt alive again. That evening, Evelyn lit a single candle and placed it next to John's portrait on the mantel. The soft glow reflected in the glass, making it seem as though his eyes were watching her, proud and steady. "I did it, John," she whispered. "Not just for me, but for others too." The next morning, she called a small gathering at the community center. Standing behind a podium, she announced the creation of the John Parker Foundation, a fund dedicated to helping older adults who had been victims of financial scams and exploitation. Her voice trembled, but it carried strength. "No one should have to fight alone," she said. "Justice is not just for me. It is for every mother, every father, every elder whose trust has been broken. This foundation will ensure that their voices are heard and their dignity protected." Applause filled the room, neighbors rising to their feet. Evelyn's chest swelled with emotion. Out of her pain, something new had been born, something larger than herself. That night, she sat in her garden, the roses blooming once more, their scent mingling with the cool breeze. She gazed at the photographs now hanging proudly on the walls inside, and felt a calm she had not known in years. Her journey had begun in betrayal and nearly ended in silence. But she had chosen to speak, to fight, to heal, and in doing so, she had found herself again. If you believe no mother should ever have to fight alone, click subscribe. Together, we will share more stories that remind the world no one deserves to be forgotten. Conclusion: Evelyn Parker's journey is not only a story about betrayal, justice, and survival. It is a reflection of something many older adults silently face every day: the fear of being forgotten, the pain of broken trust, and the strength it takes to rise again when life has taken almost everything away. Through heartbreak, she found courage. Through injustice, she discovered her voice. And through her fight, she reminded us that no mother, no elder, should ever have to battle alone. Perhaps, in her struggles, you heard an echo of your own. Maybe you too have felt abandoned, or overlooked, or betrayed by those you trusted most. If so, let Evelyn's story be a candle in the darkness, a reminder that dignity and hope can always be reclaimed. Your voice matters, your story matters. We created Grandma's Final Chapter because we believe the experiences of older generations are not the end of a book, but chapters filled with wisdom, resilience, and lessons that deserve to be shared. Each video we make is more than storytelling. It is a hand reaching out, inviting you to join a community where no one is invisible and every voice can inspire healing. So, I invite you now, gently and sincerely. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need hope today, and subscribe to our channel. By doing so, you help ensure these stories reach others who may be suffering in silence. And most importantly, tell us about your own journey in the comments. Speak your truth. Your words may be the light someone else is waiting for. Together, we can create a circle of strength where no one feels alone, and where every final chapter is written with courage, love, and dignity.